Hi, I'm Heikki Aalto-Alanen, the author of Aino and Alvar Aalto, Alive Together, and you are listening to US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Joining the show today, two authors with new books. Todd Cronan, whose book is titled Nothing Permanent, Modern Architecture in California. And, don't throw any stones, we'll talk with Andrew Heid, author of the book Glass Houses. Get it? Later, we've got a great jazz vocalist and band leader, Claudia Acuna. And now, here's your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. We really need to talk, folks, about Earl and Susan. Earl is your cousin, or perhaps your neighbor. He runs a small construction company and has built a number of fine houses, but none of them are modernist. He's about 45, energetic, friendly, reliable, and he's the one you turn to for construction questions. Susan is your good friend, or perhaps your other neighbor. Susan is a realtor. She's about 65, always abuzz with information, and she's sold several hundred houses, only a few of them modernist. She's energetic, friendly, reliable, and she's the one you turn to for real estate questions. Now, let's say you have a modernist house, something built between 1948 and 1970. Maybe you bought it, maybe you inherited it from your parents who loved it dearly. You're emotionally attached to the house because, hey, modernist houses have a look and feel and a vibe that we all treasure. You're considering selling the house, but you want to make sure the next buyer won't tear it down. And you've heard these crazy guys on U.S. Modernist Radio,
That's us,
talk about preservation easements for years, which is the only enforceable legal way to avoid future destruction. And you're also thinking about staying there and fixing it up. Who are you going to call? Well, Susan and Earl, of course. Susan, who's great with traditional houses but never actually worked with a house under a preservation easement, is likely to tell you that doing this will make your house unsellable, or at best, way under market value. She will say that even a local historic designation, which provides zero protection, is going to hurt you financially. She's going to wave her hands and shake her head and close with, well, do what you want, but I would never do that. Earl, who's great with traditional houses but never actually built a modernist house, is likely to tell you that renovating will be way too expensive and time-consuming, and you'd be better off tearing it down and building new. Earl has never built a house with a steel frame, or a huge set of floor-to-ceiling windows, or a full concrete foundation. In fact, he's never done a mid-century renovation, but he's certain that the materials don't exist anymore, the subcontractors don't have those skills anymore, yada, yada, yada. Earl and Susan are full of yada.
That's a nice way to put it.
They want to be helpful, and they mean well, they really do. They know that most people want the quickest path to the biggest bucks, which is a quick sale or a new house, so they steer people away from the other roads less traveled. Preservation easements on good modernist houses can, but rarely affect market value. There are wonderful materials and artisans out there, experienced enough to take your house back to 1954, or make your 1954 house look more like the 21st century inside. Moral of the story? Ask Earl and Susan, sure, but keep asking. Ask a modernist architect. If you don't know any, you can find hundreds on usmodernist.org and ncmodernist.org. Those new modernist houses you love in the next town over? Find out who built them. That mid-century renovation you saw in the newspaper 10 years ago, you can look up online to find out who did the work. And for preservation easements? Talk to your local preservation society. Almost every major city has one, and they have the capacity to create these important documents, which are essentially a homeowners association for one house. Your local preservation society has resources to help you do anything you want to the modernist house you love. Heck, they've been doing it for Victorian houses for 50 years. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Los Angeles native Todd Cronan, the pride of El Camino Real Senior High School,
Go Jets!
is a professor of art history at Emory University,
Go Eagles!
a graduate of the PhD program at UC Berkeley.
Go Golden Bears!
He researches the important intersection between fine art, architecture, and class politics.
Now look both ways and be sure to cross with the light.
His latest book, Nothing Permanent: Modern Architecture in California, explores the work of Richard Neutra and Charles and Ray Eames,
Who we must remind you again were not brothers.
among many other influential architects. He is a member of the board of the Friends of the Schindler House, which you can visit on Kings Road in Los Angeles, and he's the founder and editor of nonsite.org. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Todd, before we talk about architecture, you went to a really great high school in the late 80s in Woodland Hills
Yes, indeed.
with some well-known alumni. America Ferrera, Brad Garrett, Tiffany Haddish,
Really?
Christopher Knight from the Brady Bunch, and even William Zabka from the Karate Kid. We found out that you were really rocking a perm, the full Al Yankovic.
Whoa.
Oh, yes, indeed. I'm a Valley kid through and through. It's true. I was frequently recognized as Kirk Cameron, and then I had to disappoint people.
Did you grow up in a modernist house, an Eichler maybe? Because I know there are a lot of them out there in the Valley.
Absolutely not.
No?
Not at all. Nope. A house that was looking like a Hansel and Gretel cottage.
Oh.
Made of gingerbread? Is that right?
Yeah, more or less. No, my understanding of Los Angeles happened much later. I didn't really have much clue what was going on until grad school. I had a course on Frank Lloyd Wright, and in that, I was informed that there are all these Frank Lloyd Wright houses in Los Angeles.
Who knew?
Exactly. And I came back home, and I was blown away. And I think, like so many people, got my hands on that Gebhard and Winter Los Angeles guidebook and used it until it more or less disintegrated in my hand.
Now, on your book, you have a photo of a beautiful house on the cover. Which house is that?
That is Craig Elwood's Smith House up on Kenter Road.
And I believe that's been recently renovated and restored.
Yes, it has. The photograph is by Marvin Rand, and it's just a beautiful photograph. And I really pushed to get that on the cover, so I'm thrilled that it made it.
We love Craig Elwood. We've had several Elwood authorities on the show, as well as his daughter, Erin, who's been working on a documentary about her dad for some time now. We hope that that's moving quite along.
Great. Yeah, he's a very great architect, and I'm not sure he's been served super well by some of the recent dirt that's been dug up on him, because he's really a very, obviously he and his associates are very excellent architects and deserve, real attention.
Now, in your book, you call the modernist movement in California one of modern architecture's most widely known and misunderstood movements. So what are the big misunderstandings about it, Todd?
Yeah, so I do think of it as a kind of golden age of architecture. And, when I came to it, it was really a revelation to see this stuff. And I started with the Los Angeles guidebook, and it's a style guidebook, right? So it has, it lists the architecture in terms of Victorian, Beaux-Arts, Mission Revival, Arts and Crafts, Art Deco.
Hansel and Gretel.
Through international style. Yeah, exactly. So you go through the book and you go to the houses, and it has it tells you what the style of the different houses are. But the problem with that is everything kind of gets lumped together as one big thing. And that has really dominated the literature on California modern. It's kind of like a style thing. So architects like Richard Neutra or R.M. Schindler are kind of said in the same breath, as though they're doing the same thing, or Craig Elwood and Pierre Koenig. And what I show is that these are very contested ideas that they're working through. So, Neutra and Schindler famously couldn't agree on lunch after, 1930 or so. And, Elwood and Koenig, who look similar stylistically, are actually doing completely different things in the end. And that's my aim in the book, is to try and recover what they're actually intending rather than, the style that has kind of lumped them all together.
Yeah, because it really is easy when things are close to each other to consider them to be the same thing. when
Yeah,
there are bigger, more important stories behind all of this.
exactly.
Well, let's go back in time a little bit. You've done some research on the politics of the Bauhaus,
Yes.
the famous German movement that influenced modernism in America. So tell me, Todd, be honest, are the classicists right? Is modernism just an insidious plot planned by the Nazis 100 years ago to take over our country?
What?
Yes, of course it is.
I didn't get that memo.
No. So Gropius, Walter Gropius comes to Los Angeles in May of 1928, and he stays with Neutra, and he sees Neutra's Lovell House in construction, and he sees the just finished Jardinette apartments. And then Neutra is invited back to give lectures at the Bauhaus. So this happens in 1930. So Neutra travels to Germany and goes to the Bauhaus. And when he comes back, he thinks of what he's doing as really preaching the gospel of the Bauhaus. It doesn't change his mind really much at all from that period onwards. So what does that mean? Basically what the Bauhaus believed, and it's a really strange idea, is that architectural materials, wood, glass, steel, iron, concrete, there's laws to these materials, and they do things to you. So if you're in a house like a glass house, it will make you a certain kind of person, a good, enlightened person, by virtue of the materials, and vice versa. So if you're in a brick house, it makes you kind of a miserable person. And that is something they, quote unquote, researched a great deal, so that there were certain laws that you can kind of uncover about the nature of materials, and then you could just deploy them as an architect. You must actually, if you know what they do to you, deploy them safely on the inhabitants to shape them and mold them. And there's a phrase that's used a lot, which is kind of haunting, human sculpting. So you sculpt the inhabitant, as Neutra says, 24/7, 365. So if you live in a house and the house has got, these materials and these kind of shaped spaces, you are being transformed by that space throughout the whole of your life. And that's a very big responsibility and a kind of wild idea.
Well, this was the premise, really, of a lot of public housing projects in the 1960s done by modernist architects, that the design was going to make all of these communities in turmoil settle down and live peacefully together.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way I put it is it's a kind of combination of pessimism and optimism. Pessimism about people to change their own lives, and then optimism about the architect helping people along. And that's a bad arrangement, I think, because it really doesn't think that people are up to the task of making their lives for themselves. So they think that the medium, the materials of architecture will make the kind of people that you want, but that you don't have.
Sounds a little bit like a master race plan. Maybe those
That's what the classicists are telling us.
I know.
Yeah.
A little elitist, if you may.
It's true that there's too much talk about biology. I'll say that among the Bauhaus for sure. And then for Neutra, Neutra's really interested in neurology. So if you ever pick up anything Neutra says, and I'm not exactly encouraging anyone to do that, but if you do, it is just saturated with the latest research on neurology, that somehow he can play on your nerve endings through all the various materials in the house to create a certain kind of inhabitant.
I think Facebook has mastered neurology, really. I mean, they're the ones controlling our lives right now.
Them and that X thing.
Yeah.
No. Thank God Neutra's wrong.
Yeah, like Dr. Phil might say, how's that working out for you? I mean, architecture, really didn't follow through on that promise at any scale. You might say it was true for a single-family house, but then again, Neutra was famous for spending hours, sometimes days, with a family to understand how they lived in order to design a house for them.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful that it didn't work out. That the kind of ideas about how these houses would function over time to create people really is a kind of pipe dream. Neutra's houses, I think, are quite beautiful, but you'll never actually hear him talking about the beauty of an architecture. It's always filtered through this kind of scientific language that I just don't think does a service to the houses, which, as I say, are often quite beautiful.
Also in the book, you highlight some of the differences between architects. We talked a little bit about Schindler and Neutra, and then Elwood and Koenig. What are some of the other differences between architecture that the average fan might not see at first glance?
Yeah, I mean, the big one is, for me, so someone like Elwood versus Koenig, is that Elwood really thought of the structure as limited and framed and closed, a closed space, so it doesn't reach out into infinity. Whereas Koenig and a lot of the other architects, and Koenig was quite close with Neutra, thought of their work as a kind of extending out infinitely. Neutra used to say that the mountains are the back of the house that you see through the window. So kind of almost cosmic vision of the house in space. And Schindler and Elwood and the Eameses really thought of their structures as closed works that did not extend beyond the frame of the house. And I would include people like Gregory Ain and Harwell Harris as part of that same vision of things, the kind of closed architecture. And also the idea that putting a limit on the house meant also that it had a kind of limited capacity to change people as they saw it.
Well, much of the Neutra writing is about survival through design. It's really talking much more about the humanity part of it than the architecture.
Yes.
But the belief that these were so intimately connected was the core of Neutra's whole being.
Yeah, so that's a motif that runs through the whole of this moment. I mean, it is a nuclear age, so they're thinking heavily about survival. And Neutra's book is called Survival Through Design. And as I say, the Eameses are also fundamentally interested in notions of survival, but they think about it in very, very different ways. So Neutra's thinking about how works can endure forever, so that you can somehow program into them, and that's a word he uses really from the beginning, program into them a kind of changing landscape so that they would endure for all time. And again, the Eameses, like Schindler in this, really didn't think in those terms of enduring structures, but rather a kind of temporary, at least the feel or the look of something temporary that was just there for a moment and would disappear in the next. And again, you're meant to kind of feel that sense of it being a temporary fixture, not in any kind of permanent way.
But don't they think about these houses as being integrated with their surroundings, the landscaping, the mountains behind them? Isn't that considered part of the whole experience of living in the house?
Yes, I mean, for sure, Schindler, and this is a really interesting topic, is how does the house relate to the landscape?
Right.
So Neutra has a kind of vast sense of space that extends out in all directions out to the stars. So he's constantly talking about the planets and the stars being at one with the architecture on Earth in some kind of cosmic vision. Schindler never speaks in those terms. For Schindler, the landscape would be part of the structure, but the structure would end somewhere. And that's really the distinction, I think, is that Schindler thought it was an integrated whole, a unity, which he created. Whereas Neutra thought it would just kind of blend in some larger sense with the world around it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the personality of two cousins you have at the Thanksgiving table at family night, with their different views of philosophies, right?
Yeah. I would say that Thanksgivings at their house was probably not super pleasant.
And the story goes that Neutra and Schindler had this falling out for decades and found each other in the same hospital room when Schindler was dying and made amends, I believe, around 1953.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's an amazing story, and it does appear to be true. Part of what I want to emphasize is less the kind of interpersonal issues between them, although that was significant, and less about the kind of commissions and more about their ideological differences. So they thought about architecture in very different ways, and I think that was at the root of their disagreement. But I should add that, they were actually closer in the 1930s than people have understood to this point. So Neutra's publishing Schindler's work and Schindler's teaching alongside Neutra in the 30s. So they are still connected to a degree in the 30s. And I think they kind of needed one another as a point of friction. And, I think that was helpful for them.
Do you think there was sort of a mutual respect between them that wasn't easily sensed by outsiders?
Yes. Yes and no.
They're like frenemies,
Yeah.
They were totally frenemies, yes.
Yeah.
But again, I think they egged each other on. I think they needed one another in their lives as a kind of,
a foil in a way.
Contest. Yes,
right.
A foil, exactly.
Now, back then, Todd, it seemed like every major architect had to have a manifesto, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wright did several, Neutra, Schindler. How long did that go on before people stopped writing manifestos on modernism?
Unless you were the Unabomber.
Yeah.
I don't know if they've stopped. I mean, it's one of these things. I think that artists, architects started writing up a storm really after the French Revolution because they lose their sense of an audience. So they don't know who they're working for. So they start writing these manifestos that try and suggest that this has a major impact on society, when in fact their role in society is dwindling significantly. So they kind of pump up what they're doing with their writings. I should say, though, Schindler writes, his manifesto in 1912, 1913, and he doesn't change a jot from then to the day he died. Neutra, it is jaw-dropping to see the Neutra archive, the amount of writing that he produced. It seemed as though his primary gig was writing, if you look at it. It's just reams and reams and books that unpublished, that he really, really wanted to give some kind of very, very serious support for what he's doing, as though it wasn't, it had to have this kind of armature of a kind of serious intellectual meaning to it for it to be considered as viable. So that's definitely a kind of different temperament, whereas Schindler really wrote very little.
You've done some work on Charles and Ray Eames, again, husband and wife, not brothers, and particularly on their films. So what have you discovered about their films, which are still celebrated?
So basically, the Eames are kind of the second half of the book for me, and I'm currently working on a guidebook to the films of Charles and Ray Eames, and they made about 100 films, which is a kind of a large number.
Very large, yeah.
Well more than half of them have never been seen or very rarely been seen, and some of them are impossible to even get your hands on. So they took the practice of filmmaking very, very seriously. And you could say that after 1955, 56, they really construed themselves as filmmakers rather than furniture. So furniture is kind of like the first 10 years of their practice, and then they switch gears over to film. But my main point about the Eames is so what is striking about the Eames is that they're considered themselves functionalists. And they make these lists, long lists about how to, reconceive basic things in our lives, like cups and sofas, and basic elements of our life. So like when they're making a list about how you make a cup, they say you have to think about, shape, heat transfer, how the liquid sloshes around, how liquid's transferred into it, how it pours out, how you clean it, the kind of handle it has, how it rests on the table, how it feels in your hand, how it feels differently for men and women, including the size and shape of their hands, how it looks, its durability, weight, how the liquid sounds in the cup, and then they say things like how it will look when the sun reflects off its surface.
Wow.
And these lists just go on and on and on. And that's just for making a cup. So you can imagine that for them, making a building would be just completely intolerable situation. And they don't, right? So they only make 3 houses and a showroom, and then they're out. And, 2 of those houses, one of the houses for themselves, so they can do for themselves, and then one for they built alongside Saarinen, and then the showroom, and then another house for Herman Miller, and then they get out of the architecture game, and they slowly get out of the furniture game as well because they couldn't fulfill the demands of the list, and I think that's completely on purpose for them. So that what they really want to do is to put themselves out of business in a way.
They wrote themselves into a corner, it sounds like.
Exactly. And that's the rationale behind the films, is that you have to make models because the models are unable to they show you the possibilities of if you were to make this thing, this is what would happen. And that's what the films are. The films act as models for them, but they're not the thing, right? Because making the thing requires all of these demands, responsibility. So they're endlessly talking about responsibility. And the responsibilities kind of pile up. And rather than answering those demands, they're out and they turn over to film. So it's kind of a justification, I think, for their filmmaking. And the films are often about making furniture. They're about, making an aquarium, making an airport, making a museum or a corporate center. So they're models about what you would do if you were to make a thing, but they're not making it.
Did they make a movie about the cup?
I would say that everything they ever did is basically a version of making the cup. That's how I put it. But they didn't actually make a cup.
If you want to see one of the Eames' most popular films, you can find it on YouTube. It's called The Power of 10. It was shown throughout probably every public elementary school in the world in the 1960s. Todd's new book is Nothing Permanent, Modern Architecture in California. Thanks for joining us, Todd.
Thanks so much for having me.
Our next guest comes straight out of the Photojournalism Club at South Eugene High School.
Go Axemen.
Andrew Heid is an architect, design critic at Harvard.
Go Crimson.
And founding principal of No Architecture, an award-winning firm based in New York City. A former architecture editor at Culture magazine, Andrew is contributing editor at Faden, a publisher from whom you've probably got several books sitting on your coffee table. His latest book is Glass Houses,
which presents 50 beautiful architect design homes you'll enjoy seeing. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Andrew, let's start with the old saying. Those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Where did that come from? I mean, have glass houses been around for centuries, or is this a more recent thing?
I think there's two ways to think about that. I think the modernist glass house has been around for about 80 years, but glass as a building material has been around for several hundred years. You know, the famous example being the Crystal Palace in the 19th century.
Right, in London.
That's right, in London. But in terms of people throwing stones at glass houses, that's a very good question. I'm not sure I have an answer for you off the top of my head.
Well, I figure if anybody would know, that would be you, because not everybody writes a book called Glass Houses.
And I came to this interview full of sound effects. I have all
kinds of glass breakage here.
Yeah, it's really, should not be walking around here barefoot.
No, I mean, the interesting thing about glass, of course, most glass houses today, but even in the past, are made with what's called safety glass or tempered glass or heat-strengthened glass or laminated glass, which actually doesn't break like that. And it's actually very difficult to break. You could take a sledgehammer to a window and it's not going to break.
Right. It wouldn't be a very interesting sound effect, though.
No.
Yeah.
No.
It would be just a thud.
Then that's a good thing.
That's right.
Architects have been structurally building with glass, I guess, since that famous London building. How has the form developed over time? What sort of stages have you seen glass construction go through?
Well, I think there's many ways to think about glass, but I think the most interesting way is glass as large pieces of material that can span and enclose buildings. So, I mean, there's glass blocks and glass bricks, but we're talking about large pieces of glass. And the real technological innovation in the last, let's say, 50 years is through what's called insulated glass. So glass that actually has two pieces of glass with a space in between them that creates a degree of insulation. Because before that, we would have glass structures with very little insulation. So it's kind of like having a window open, yet you can see through it. So the real innovation is these larger panes of glass that are also insulating from the inside and from the outside. And that's what you see a lot in this book is like architects of the last 80 years developing that further and further and creating what I would argue is a connection between inside and outside, which is really important in any glass structure.
How do people protect the glass on their houses? I mean, some of the houses are in places where there's wind or hurricanes or things like that. Is there anything an owner of a glass house can do to try to guard against foul weather?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Depending on where you're located, you know, the glass is engineered and the structure and the architect along with the structural engineer would design the windows to be resistant to high wind loads, for instance. So that's kind of an important thing for a hurricane. And you can also cover windows and glass panels if it was a hurricane with wood. That's sometimes done. But the main thing would be to design it correctly from the beginning so it's not a victim or connected to being damaged by, let's say, high wind. In terms of like moisture protection, I mean, that's the whole history of architecture. So you could say, well, how you design the roof, how you detail all these things and connect the glass window to its structure becomes really important. And that really depends on the climate, culture, and context of how that's done.
Well, let's talk about the book. It's called Glass Houses. How did you choose these to be included?
Well, it kind of happened by a cocktail party. I was introduced to Amelia Torani, who was the publisher at Biden, and she was really interested to have me to do a book on I.M. Pei, which we are doing, a kind of monograph on his work. And then along the side, she was like, well, I would love you to have you contribute one of your projects, which is in the book. The Courtyard House is one of my projects that I designed, to this book on glass houses. I was like, sure. And I said, well, by the way, may I make a few suggestions of a few other projects to include, which is about 80 other projects I suggested, or maybe 50, some of which are actually included in the book as well. And then she's like, well, why don't you write the introduction? I was like, sure. But the whole time saying, well, I'm not a writer, I'm not a historian, so I'm just writing as an architect to hopefully a general audience. What I'm interested in glass houses, why I love them, and to me, what the kind of relevance of them is as an architect, but also why is this relevant to a more general audience who love architecture. And I guess I would connect the dots to the Farnsworth House and the Philip Johnson Glass House, two projects in the book that I also, as a young child, was really drawn to. I saw images of those projects and really caught my imagination, and perhaps in a way allowed me to become an architect by having seen those projects as a young child.
I think of Johnson's Glass House in New Canaan, Connecticut as the first real glass house. Is that right? Is that accurate?
Well, maybe it's the first conceptual real glass house. Technically, Mies designed his house before that, the Farnsworth House, which was built a couple of years later. But in a way, Johnson's maybe was the first kind of canonical one that was built in the country and in the world. But conceptually, Mies, of course, had thought about these problems much earlier than Philip was practicing as an architect. He designed the Reeser House in 1938, which was unbuilt, and many other glass structures. Also glass office buildings, like his early office tower in Berlin that was never built on Friedrichstrasse. These were very early projects in the 1920s that he was very interested in pushing along in a way that's very different from, let's say, Le Corbusier, who's not included in the book, like the Villa Savoie in 1929. But in terms of the first glass house that's maybe all glass, yeah, you could say it could be the first that was built, the glass house by Philip Johnson. But, Mies did build the Barcelona Pavilion in 1929 and also the Tugendhat Villa in 1929, which had walls of glass as well. So maybe not a house, but earlier works of large-scale glass walls.
And what effect did Johnson's Glass House have on architecture?
I think it had a huge impact. I think in terms of the discipline of architecture, one of the intractable problems that every generation of architect has faced for, let's say, several thousand years is this relationship between inside and outside. Typically, in most conventional houses or buildings, there's a strong separation between inside and outside by having opaque walls or columns or structure that holds up a roof or holds up a floor. And what the glass house did, and I think one could say also the early projects of Mies, including the Farnsworth House, was to not only elaborate this problem, but to somehow solve it by creating a very lightweight skeletal structural frame, which is what the glass house has, out of steel, and then these large walls that are completely transparent. So the windows really disappear, and the whole experience of being inside, which is a kind of very human desire and need, is at the same time you're connected to the outside. And I think that has done a lot for the discipline of architecture, is that kind of, one could say, spiritual or emotional connection between the natural landscape or nature outside and being inside and out of the rain, so to speak.
Johnson's house was very unique at the time it came along, but since then there have been tens of thousands of houses that have a similar glass wall structure. How did you choose the ones you put in the book?
I guess for me, it was a very intuitive choice. There were maybe half the projects were chosen by Amelia, maybe half or so were chosen by me. The ones I chose were ones that were really interested in pushing what a glass house could be in terms of its conception. So for me, the ones that really stand out are the Swiss and Japanese examples of these structures. So it's not just a kind of mid-century modernist frame, but they're really rethinking how glass is used, how structure is used, how the spaces inside and outside are connected. And that to me is, as both an architect and a teacher in architecture, kind of the really exciting part of some of these projects is we're really questioning what architecture can be at the most, let's say, fundamental level.
And in the last decade or so, we've got mirror houses, which you include in the book as well.
Yes. So one of the things that's quite special about glass, of course, it's both reflective and transparent, depending on the angle of incidence. So even right now in the Courtyard house, you could be standing in front of a window and see more or less through 70% transparency. If you stand at an acute angle to the window, it actually becomes like a mirror. So one of the exciting possibilities of glass, of course, is that it can be used in different ways, both mirrored and transparent. And so in order to show that possibility in the many different ways glass can be used, we included some mirrored projects in the book.
And for those of you who have not seen a house like this, a mirrored project is basically a glass exterior that's a mirror. So when you look at the house, you see what's around the house. It's almost trying to create a little bit of invisibility, so to speak.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's almost like a piece of sculpture or art then, where instead of seeing through the structure, you're seeing a reflection of what's around it, the landscape around.
And mirrored houses have really taken off in certain areas of the country, particularly in the West and the desert states.
Well, part of that, I think, is also due to the environmental factors of glass. As I was saying, glass historically was not a very good insulator. It let a lot of heat in and a lot of heat out. And so when you have a hot climate, like in the Southwest, you actually want to keep a lot of that light energy of the sun out. And so heavily mirrored glass from the outside does a pretty good job of that, of basically blocking a lot of the light and light energy of the sun coming inside.
Andrew, like many famous architects, your first commission was for your parents, and the result was something called the Courtyard House. So what's that house all about?
Well, that's true. My grandfather lived in Portland, and when my grandmother passed away, he wanted to live in the kind of countryside, and he found this piece of property in a small town that he purchased, and he had this dream that my parents would live here someday on this property, and I would design and build them a house on this property. It's kind of an unusual piece of property because the house is located in a small town, but it overlooks this large field, river, and pond below. There's kind of 25 acres of this protected wild river. And it was hard to imagine how we would build here because, it's a kind of typical American small town, houses along the street. But what we did was actually divided his lot, the house lot, in half and actually purchased a house next door, divided that lot in half and sold those houses, and then created 2 new urban infill lots with a new private road connecting it back to the main street. So in a way, we invented our own site that while people think it looks like we're in the middle of nature in a forest, miles away from a city, we're actually in a small town where you can walk to everything. So we have this very dramatic, unusual site where we have a view over this kind of hill looking towards this field, river, and pond below. So in a way, we really wanted to have a house that was transparent and kind of cantilever towards that view. At the same time, we have these neighboring structures kind of to the west that we wanted to be kind of acoustically and visually separated from. So in a way, we sunk the house into the ground by 8-10 feet. So the main roof is actually at the uphill level of the ground. And then as it spills out over to the east to the view, it cantilevers over this hillside, kind of like one could say falling water does in a more simple way. And that, of course, required us to have light and air into the center of the house. So we had this idea of a courtyard that would be cut into the center of this house that's made out of glass that would bring in the light and view and air and ventilation into the center of the house. Because on one side, it's all floor-to-ceiling glass windows, but on the other side, it's actually mostly underground. So we actually have limited views to the neighboring house next door.
And do you use that house now to take prospective clients through?
I do. Yeah, we've done a lot of different client trips here and different events, from art exhibits as well. I'm actually here right now.
Oh, great. Famous architects like Richard Meyer and Charlie Gwathmey all became famous through projects for their parents.
Yeah, I mean, architecture, it's an interesting challenge because to do the kind of innovative projects that students of architecture want to do in schools, it's very rare that you're given that opportunity when you graduate or you're a young architect. And particularly in this country, these opportunities are very few and far between. So, I feel extremely fortunate that my parents could take their existing house, which they sold, and then take that money and to build something, quite special, even though it's actually quite economical at the same time. And that history of that parent, or the Mother's House by Robert Venturi for his mother. It's a very long-staying tradition or history. So it's kind of exciting and really special to be part of that history.
The book is Glass Houses, and it's a great gift to be thinking about for that special someone you love on Valentine's Day. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here.
Chilean jazz singer and bandleader Claudia Acuna made her debut on the New York jazz scene in the 1990s. After releasing 5 albums, she took a break, then returned in 2019 with the Latin Grammy-nominated album Turning Pages, followed shortly after by her latest album, Duo. That album features duets with a number of Claudia's fellow Latin American artists, bringing the sound of her youth to a wider audience. And now we get to know her better, too. Welcome, Claudia.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction and for giving me this chance to be with you for a couple of minutes.
Well, Claudia, we know a little bit about the jazz scene in America. What is it like in Chile?
Right now, it's very exciting. This music have reached out to so many cultures and countries, and I know it's been always a very hardcore, big fans in Chile, and through the years, I can say that today we have a larger audience and even quite a few festivals that I hope and dream they will grow enough to start bringing more often masters and amazing musicians from here to that side of the world.
Now, what brought you to New York City from Chile?
Jazz and music. My dream to go to school and study in a music school, jazz school, and my dream to go to all those clubs that I used to hear stories in the basement and stay up all night and come out when the sun is coming. And that's why I moved here. Music pushed me to come here and pursue this life.
Where did you go to school?
I didn't. I couldn't afford it.
Oh, so you're kind of self-taught in this respect?
Yes. When I gave one of my auditions, the school was trying to help me, but I couldn't get the support because at the time it was not that much of support in Chile or anything, to be honest with you. And she said to me, you're going to have to do it the old way. Hear all the jam sessions.
Right.
And she recommended me to go to Barry Harris' workshop. So I'm one of the Barry Harris students among many that went to every Tuesday to his workshop, and then Smalls and my mentors like Harry Whitaker became my school. And I got a gig being a dishwasher, and then I went up as a co-check at the Blue Note.
Wow.
And I got the gig because I needed the money, but also I thought to myself, if I'm working there, I can see everybody and I don't have to pay for a ticket.
Good plan.
Very clever for a 20-something-year-old girl, and rightfully so. I was so honored and blessed to have met some of our masters that are no longer in this physical world, and it was a master class every day. And some of them were so kind to me to listen to what I have to ask or say and giving me so much encouragement. And some of them even stay to listen to me in the jam session. At the time, it was a jam session after the main act. And sure after that, I got fired because I was singing in the jam session and
not checking the coats?
Not checking the coats, even though I had the waitress covering for me, and the band at the time was like, we need to get her in early. And I got fired. And the beauty of that is 10 years after, I was a headliner on a double bill with Terence Blanchard.
Wow.
And it became a tradition that many students that come to New York to study music try to get that gig as a co-check because the word went around of my story, and I've met many students that work there. It's like, I got this gig because I heard about what you did. So that's a little bit of my story, and being a co-check, dishwasher, dog walking, many jobs that many immigrants do when you come to this country. I started doing gigs, and then shortly my own gigs around, and the word started getting out. And before I knew, I was getting signed by Verve, and I laughed on the person's face when he came to Sweet Basil at the time to see me and tell me that Verve was interested, and I thought it was a joke.
Really? Oh.
In my radar, in my mind, the record deal business did not exist. And I didn't think whatsoever that I was going to be, of all places, signed by... I never thought I was that good. You know what I mean? And when somebody explained to me what was happening, the rest is history then. And now we're talking.
Right.
20-something years later.
Let's hear one of these songs. This one is called Yo.
Walking in the darkness, shining light to my soul, drifting from the pain is like a shadow in my voice. Duermo con un sueño sin palabras, queriendo despertar por la humanidad. Siento en mis pies mis sueños que se quiebran con el viento. Hoy quiero solo entregar mi canto, solo yo, la libertad de todos, solo yo, solo yo.
I really like the backtrack of that. Is that you whispering?
Yes, it's me doing everything, the whispering, the talking.
The bass drum.
Yeah. The bass drum, which is called bombo legüero, is a very traditional drum from the south of the America, using folk music most,
Yeah, it's minimalist. It's very moving.
Yes. That was the concept and the idea. I've been known to do albums and with very complex arrangements and rhythmically things. And this album duo was inspired by the pandemic, but also that sense of less is more, and to come to a very simple ways that I think the pandemic did many things to many of us, you know?
And less is more, a famous phrase that came from our pal, Mies van der Rohe, famous architect in Chicago.
Which I love her, and I love the world of architecture. That's one of my passions, secret passion, and I love that phrase.
Well, Mies was a he, but that's okay. We'll still let him know ultimately that you love him.
Yes, sorry. I always do that as a foreign person. People always make fun of me because I keep mixing the he with the she, and I call you she and he, and it's just like, I'm so sorry, but my apologies.
I've never done that, so I don't know what you're talking about. Claude.
Yes, I am a cloud.
Yeah.
Your new album, Duo, is a series of wonderful duets. The only song on the album that's not a duet is a song by Chick Corea, and I understand you actually knew him.
I was privileged, as many of us, to say that I knew him, and not just met him and say hello. We have lunch. In fact, before Verve, Chick wanted me to be in Conquer when he was the ENR or something. And he's the one actually who told me, go to Verve because that's a major label. And he was beyond an inspiration. I mean, I can think of being inspired of Chick Corea living in Chile and jumping when you were here, the music, because it was so unbelievably strong and beautiful. And then to meet him and find a mentor, an idol who took the time always to talk to you and, more important, to listen to you. I dreamed to sing with him, and I missed that chance. And when I decided to do this duo, I thought about many and different instruments that I will do with, and I couldn't. And I thought to myself, this is going to be my humble tribute to him, and I'm going to sing the way I practice at home, and I've done it so many times. Like I used to play Beethoven's piano solo albums and sing along with him.
Huh.
And that day I decided to do it, closing my eyes and thinking, singing, imagining him playing, you know? So in a way I was doing a duet with him spiritually, but it was just me paying a tribute to him. And I couldn't find myself to replace the piano or him per se. So I just took it as a way of saying thank you for everything that he have inspired us and will continue forever. That's the beauty of this form of art, that we all going to be gone and the music is going to continue living, you know?
This next song is called Eclipse de Luna, and who are you singing with here?
None the least, this young cat, you know, that some people know him, Christian McBride, Eclipse de Luna.
Eclipse de Luna.
Eclipse de luna en el cielo, ausencia de luz en el mar, muy sola con mi desconsuelo, mirando la noche me puse a llorar. Pensaba que ya no me amabas, con honda desesperación, y algo que siempre eclipsaba, la luz de tu amor. Eclipse de luna en el cielo, ausencia de luz en el mar, muy sola con mi desconsuelo, mirando la noche me puse a llorar. Eclipse de amor en tus labios que ya no me quieren besar. Quisiera olvidar tus agravios y luego soñar. Eclipse de luna en el cielo, ausencia de luz en el mar, muy sola con mi desconsuelo, mirando la noche me puse a llorar. Eclipse de amor en tus labios que ya no me quieren besar. Quisiera olvidar tus agravios y luego soñar, y luego soñar.
Your voice is so rich and full, it doesn't really need much in the way of accompaniment, does it?
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful compliment. I accept it, and I am very thankful.
Oh, take it.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Give me more.
Now, Claudia, you've been very open about the difficulties of being a mom and a jazz singer. So what are your tips for aspiring young women out there who want to do both?
Well, I should correct that one. I haven't found it to be difficult to be a mom in this business, and I'm not the first one. My child has been on tours, recordings, festivals since he was 4 weeks old. And I love how he got used to noises. He could take a nap on a drum solo.
Oh, wow.
It is challenging, for sure. It's challenging, especially when you're breastfeeding or you have a beautiful dress and you have to change diaper, and all of a sudden, woo, surprise. Always carry an extra change of clothes because you never know what's going to happen with your baby.
Yeah.
Take your baby to all the clubs and rehearsals and things so he or she get used to the noise and the people, and you're going to have a kid that is going to be so used to and social. My challenges have nothing to do with motherhood, more or less than any mother in any professional field. Mothers have work since work in music exists. I used to hear people say, oh, your career is over. And it's not fair because no artist, man or woman, should have to choose between parenting, being a parent, or career. They're compatible. It's a beautiful way to raise and bring a child to this world among music, artists, places, people. It goes in their spine and their lungs. What more beautiful to have a child? And I work very hard to be able to speak about this. I took a time away because I've been healing myself from being a survival of domestic violence. That's the truth. But motherhood, and I feel obligated to say this because I do not want younger people to think that becoming a parent is a problem. I've seen people like Jerry Allen playing with their child in her back. I've seen many musicians in recent festivals, men and women, with their children there. And I think it's one of the most beautiful things for a parent to be able to share this world, this beautiful world that doesn't have color, race, languages. It's about engaging in culture. It's the most beautiful example of humanity that you can give to a child.
And it helps that children like music.
Absolutely. Music, people, culture. Music, as we all know, jazz or anything, is a universal language. And we know this for a fact. It's a corny line, but it's really true. So all I can say is to future generation, make sure that you have a good partner. Make sure that you have a supportive system. But when you decide to be a mom or a dad, just go for it. Go for it, because what you have to offer to that child, you're going to offer one of the most wonderful worlds, the world of music.
Claudia, thank you so much for joining us and for that really inspiring message.
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity and for this space to keep embracing and uplifting the world with music. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. Okay, Tom,
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.2 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Kelly Policelli. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another stone-throwing, glass-breaking edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.